Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. I wanted to talk a bit today about hospitals. Now, I'm just gonna post a little disclaimer here, use this advice at your own risk. If you disagree with it, fine, let me know about it respectfully. But you're your own person and you have to make your own decisions. So don't blame me if it doesn't go well. In my personal opinion, you should be wary of utilizing emergency services in a disaster situation. I'm going to say that generally, emergency services, but specifically here for this video, I'm talking about medical services. So the ambulance and the hospitals. Why? Well, some things you have to think about, depending on the nature of the disaster. It could be a variety of things, of course. Let's just say in the instance of a pandemic, that's the scenario that I believe to be one of the most plausible and likely and well overdue scenarios, is the pandemic scenario. Now, for one, these places are going to be very crowded. Excuse me. So the chances of you getting service in an expedient manner are very slim. So chances are you're going to be stuck in a waiting room with a bunch of other sick people. Probably you're going to be inundated with all other types of germs and stuff like that you wouldn't have been had you stayed home. Now, this is only in the instance of certain ailments, of course. If in the instance of a pandemic, you have someone who falls ill to whichever sort of virus or infection is plaguing the masses, then you have to ask yourself, well, what is the hospital going to do for you anyways, right? If you have a supply of antiviral medication or antibiotics, that's great. Chances are, if you're one of the lucky ones who actually gets seen in that instance, and there might be a long wait, and sure enough, you probably will be seen if you wait long enough. However, if you're one of the people who's looking out for your loved ones and you take them there and you're still healthy and you fall ill, that's one less person your family has to take care of everybody. So I'm very wary of hospitals. For one, if the grid goes down, the backup supplies are limited. The backup resources, their capabilities, the energy, it's all going to be very limited. And security, for one, because in spite of the fact that even gangbangers have respect for the dead, there's still going to be some theft. There's going to be frustrated people who are trying to get service. In addition to that, you're going to have a lot of hospital employees probably bugging out. And, you can't really blame them in that instance. It's not like they're getting danger pay. Some of them are paid well, some aren't. So they're going to be short-staffed, likely. That goes without saying. The beds are going to be in short supply. That goes without saying. They already are in short supply. The health system doesn't really function that effectively. And another thing is that hospitals are not clean. Okay? There's so many, and I work in one, so I know. There's so many places and points where germs can be transmitted in a hospital. Yes, there's certain cleanliness protocols to follow on a daily basis, but some of those things don't get clean for 24 hours. Some of those doorknobs and even the countertops, the debit machines, anything that you would touch with your hands, in the washroom or what have you, don't get clean. They might get clean once a day. So in a crowded situation, there's going to be a lot of hands, there's going to be a lot of transactions that are going to work to spread the diseases. So, I'd be very wary of the cleanliness of hospitals. In addition to that, you got to think about the psychiatric wards. As is right now, where I work, there's always crisis related to psychiatric care. So, if there's short staff with security, and people aren't being properly treated, chances are things are going to pop off in that respect. A lot of things to consider. So you're going to be more likely to contract other sorts of disease and viruses had you just stayed home and tried to nurture the sick person by yourself. Granted that you had the means to do so, and some advanced preppers do have those means to do so, especially people with that sort of training. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of people in the medical fields who disagree with what I'm saying, and that's fine. It's on a case-by-case basis, right? Like, what I'm saying doesn't apply to every situation. It may only apply to, very extreme, grid down, collapse, disastrous type situations. One thing with respect to disease in the post-collapse environment or the post-disaster environment, I prefer post-disaster environment because it's not always a collapse. One thing General S. Lee had said a while back, and I think it might have been indirectly in response to one of my videos about, how I felt pandemic was the most likely scenario. He had suggested something interesting, that he felt that pandemic would be likely the result of and not the cause of grid down. So that, because of he didn't really get into any detail as to why, but I could sort of elaborate on that a bit. And it likely has a lot to do with how our immune systems are propped up by the current system. With vaccinations and general health care, with supplementation, vitamin supplements. And I know, I'm not pro-vaccine. I think I'm more of a minimalist. I believe, try to get by with as little as possible. But the fact is, lots of infants are being, if there ever is a grid down and your infant can't be injected with the 100-odd vaccines they put in before they're 6 years old, chances are they might be more prone to these diseases, which had to harden themselves due to the resistance, the antibiotic resistance. That's a fact. I know some people might not agree with that and don't agree with me on my views about vaccination and stuff like that. That's fine. You're entitled to your opinion. Lots of these people work in healthcare. And all I can say to you is that, you're a part of the medical industrial complex. If you don't know what that is, then maybe you should do some research. Maybe you should start thinking a bit more critically about the system of which you're a part. That's all I'm going to say about that. I can sure see it, and I'm knee-deep in it. So, something you're going to want to keep in mind is that disease is going to be very likely in a post-collapse, post-disaster environment, because of those main factors that we have been sort of softened. There was a study that showed how children who played in the dirt developed heightened microbial resistance, resistance, more hardy immune systems. And because a lot of children don't have that right now, we've gone very soft, so we're going to be even more disease prone. And that's probably another reason to avoid hospitals, is because if you can't get the treatment you need and you're just exposing yourself to all sorts of illnesses and transmissible pathogens, then you're putting yourself in a bad situation, I think. The hospitals are going to be crazy, man. It's going to be your instinct to want to flock to these places. Good luck finding parking. That's all I can say. But you gotta question that instinct, because that's your grid up instinct. The grid up instinct is phone 911. When there's an emergency, phone 911. And that's what you're probably going to do when you get in that panic mode of someone's been injured. What do I do? The first thought that pops into your head is going to be emergency services. But and I know that they're going to be overwhelmed. And you can try to phone them, and if you have enough people around, you might as well get someone on the phone while you take care of that person. But chances are you're going to be on hold, and they're going to tell you it's going to be an indefinite amount of time before they can send someone out to help you, if the EMTs haven't already wised up and bugged out. Now, chances are a pandemic is going to be more incremental, so it's not going to be all of a sudden. It's going to be a slow, sort of drawn-out collapse. In the instance of a grid down, EMP, solar flare, virus, something like that, something like a computer virus, something to that extent, I think it going to a hospital would be a very bad idea. For one, you're going to have to brave the traffic. And when you get there, hoping that emergency power supply that they have lasts long enough, with their short staff and crazy people running around, frustrated people, sick people. If it's not a major emergency, I would advise against going to these places. Now, this should go without saying at this point, but if you have a chronic health condition, for one, you should be doing everything right now to deal with that. If you have tooth problems, if there's that tooth that you haven't pulled out that you've been putting off, or if you have eye vision problems and you've been putting off going to the eye doctor, go and get that stuff done now. Because you never know when it's going to happen. And if you get stuck with a abscessed tooth or something like that in a shit hits the fan situation, that could be your death. Not only will it be incredibly painful, but it could actually lead to your death if it got infected and you didn't have the proper antibiotics, which even if you did nowadays, due to the resistance factors, they might not even be that effective. But you should have an extra supply of any medication that you need, that you may need, that you are dependent on at this point in time. If you're a person with addiction problems, I would encourage you to, first and foremost, quit that. Quit it while the grid is up. Do what you will. I can only give you advice. I can't obviously change your mind. Trust me, as a counselor, I know this. But if you're a serious prepper and you have a chemical dependency right now, you should seriously consider overcoming that before, because the last thing you want to endure is withdrawal systems in a post-disaster environment. Things are going to be bad enough. Things are going to be stressful enough. But to add withdrawal on top of that, that's another story. I just don't foresee, depending on the severity, chances are your municipality, state, province, what have you, has plans in place. I know the Security and Prosperity Partnership, a part of that between the Canada, Mexico, and United States, there was a pandemic plan outlined in that, and I did a video on that, and I'll post a link to it here, where they talk about, like, you know, the major institutions that they want to keep propped up, and all sorts of plans for where they're going to put people and shelter people and stuff like that. So, I mean, the plans are all drawn up. They're not that public. They are actually public to some extent, but you know, they're not very well known and commonly known about, but they are there. So I don't doubt that they have plans for expanded emergency services, but that's all contingent upon people coming to work and all the logistics panning out properly. So I wouldn't depend on that, because we all know how efficient hospitals function right now, and all those people who are doctors and nurses, you know, it's commonly depicted in the movies that they just don't get sick, but they're just as prone to disease as you are. That bullshit flu shot you take every year that protects you against 3 of the main strains of the virus, you know, they forced us to take that this year, and of the people who took it, they didn't force us. They say you have to mask or vaccinate. And the ones who took it, over half of them got sick with either another type of flu or, you know, some lesser harmful version of the flu that they were injected with. So it's not going to protect you against the big one, you know. Sure enough, they're already cooking up vaccines for H5N1 and H7N9 and all that stuff. And they've been bombarding people in the movies with, you know, whether it's World War Z, where the cure is this vaccination, essentially injecting yourself with the disease and then curing it, so the zombies don't get you. You know, I mean, if it's the movie Contagion or something like that, there's all sorts of vaccine propaganda movies out there. I guess I sort of digress from the hospital, you know, from the hospital issue. But they could well be war zones, the hospitals, so I would use a lot of discretion before getting everybody into the car and impulsively putting your foot on the gas and driving to the hospital, because chances are you're going to be one of thousands who had the same idea. And then, of course, you risk leaving other people back at your house unprotected. And if it's a grade down, that's the last thing you want to do, is leave your shit unprotected, right? You pretty much would have to bring everybody with you, which everybody's going to bring everybody with them, and it's just going to be a clusterfuck. Pardon my language. But if you're offended by language, you know, you're going to be offended by a lot in the post-disaster environment. So on that note, I'll let that sit with you, and let me know what you think. Let me know if there's something I'm not thinking about, or, you know, you guys always have great odds and ends that I didn't consider. Some things which run counter to what I'm saying, and some things in support. I welcome all of it, so long as it's respectful. But thanks for watching. Canadian Prepper out.